say a few of the personal connection with Professor Narlikar for five to 7 minutes each. That's a little well, it will take a bit longer if it's necessary. And then if anyone else who's present wants to say a few words, you're welcome. You're welcome to say that. If I've missed out your name, you're welcome to add your name to the list. It's just what we have there. Come along. We arranged some snacks at the end of this event. It's going to be just outside. Please join us. It gives a chance to interact, mingle, and we can chat about Professor Narlikar in a more relaxed sort of setting. So Professor Narlikar and University of KwaZulu-Natal. He's had a very long, close interaction with the University of KwaZulu-Natal, before that the University of Natal, and also South Africa nationally. He's been a regular visitor to Durban and other cities. He's presented many talks at the University of KwaZulu-Natal and elsewhere also. I remember once he was invited to give a popular talk at the Amateur Society, the Astronomical Amateur Society of South Africa and Durban. And they booked out the school for the presentation, and they found the venue was too small. Normally those events get, the events get 20 people. He was particularly interested in South Africa, and he supported links, scientific level, between South Africa and India, and in particular, Pune, in Maharashtra state. And he encouraged scientific collaborations between scientists, students, postdoctorals, and this led to lasting collaborations, which are still going on today. The other connection that Professor Narlikar had with the University of KwaZulu-Natal is that he received an honorary doctorate from the university. I'm not sure exactly right. I think it's 2005, around 2005. He was awarded this honorary doctorate. He was at that stage, I think, visiting France, sort of fellowship, but he found time, flew down to Durban to attend the graduation ceremony where he was given this honorary doctorate. And the doctorate was awarded on the basis of his outstanding contributions to science. So perhaps one or two brief comments about Professor Narlikar's overall trajectory. He was born in 1938 in Kolhapur, India, and I think that's where he spent most of his young years. He completed an undergraduate degree at the Banaras Hindu University, which was then one of the preeminent institutions in India at that time. And he finished his PhD at the University of Cambridge in the UK. His principal appointments, he was appointed soon after he finished his PhD as a fellow of King's College in Cambridge. And but his heart was always in India. It was a period when there were lots of scientists leaving India. He went in the reverse direction, went back to India, and he was appointed professor at the Tata Institute for Fundamental Research in Mumbai, which is a world-leading center in research. And sometime later, he became the founding director of IUCA, which stands for the Inter-University Centre for Astronomy and Astrophysics in Pune. This, I think, was his intellectual sort of brainchild. Many people helped, particularly Professor Dadich in developing it. And for those people who have visited Ayuka, it's an exceptional world-class scientific center. Buildings are magnificent. It's a stunning place to visit. And research today is directed in gravity, astronomy, and astrophysics. To me, what makes this special is that apart from being a research institution, its mission is interesting, is that there must be a close connection with universities. So it's embedded, with universities and the university staff. So it's a very thriving place for interactions with scientists and researchers in this field and postgraduate students. And local and international visitors are always welcome. Visit the place, you find there's a spread of people from India and across the world. And also, Ayuka now has, India, I should say, through Ayuka, has a stake in our astronomy projects in South Africa, SALT, the Southern African Large Telescope. And I think it owns a certain percentage, and it's also now part of SCAR, Square Kilometer Array. And I think that's done through Ayuka. He was a prolific researcher, has published hundreds of papers, dozens of books, which have had substantial impact. He's written his books and papers both in English and Marathi, which is the language in Maharashtra state. And he was a great believer in science popularization, supported it in every possible way. And he was always available to give a talk, even in the most remote places, if invited. And he had a national presence, which was recognized through society. And to give an indication, once there was a conference in 1996, which I think many people here attended in Pune. And this was going to be probably talk in a major venue. In a large venue in Pune. I think it took 1,500 people or something like that. It was jam-packed with people. And the talk was to be delivered by Roger Penrose. And India being India, there were hundreds of people outside who were trying to still get into the venue after it was full. There was massive chanting from outside, not for Penrose, but saying, "We want Narlikar, we want Narlikar." And he had to go out and actually placate the crowd together with the help of Professor Dadich, and agreed to have a second talk a day later by Penrose and himself. So it's this gives an indication of how he is viewed by the broader society in India. He's received many awards, fellowships, honorary awards, accolades. I'll just briefly mention two. One is the Kalinga Award by UNESCO, and the Padma Vibration from the President of India, and several awards. So, one can continue along these lines, but I'll stop there. I will now ask Professor Naresh Dadich, who was the second director at Ayuka, very close friend and collaborator with Professor Nal. He will say something.
Thank you, Sunil, and thank you all of you for coming for this memorial meeting. You see, when the person you are talking about is so colossal, it's very difficult, and particularly when I have known him over half a century or more. it's very difficult to where to start and how to get onto this, but anyway, I think I wrote a small little piece for a newspaper, which had been already circulated and you know about. So I want to go with this. He was an extraordinary person in all senses. And as I said on that note, extraordinary people do extraordinary things. So they don't come into a room through the door in which full of us ordinary people come. They come in by breaking the woo, and that's when you realize, oh, something has happened there. Yeah. And actually, it's in that when Fred Hoyle and he proposed the new theory of gravity, that was in 1964, overnight, newly independent India, which was any independent new place, hungry of new heroes, here was the science hero was born. And overnight, he became a household name. In 1965, he came to India under the government of India's invitation, and he toured the entire country, giving lectures, and so much so at some places, coming out in the balcony and giving a show to the people, showing the people I'm not. So that was it. And I must say, I was a student in both Vallabh Vidyanagar in Gujarat, which is about 60 kilometers from Ahmedabad. So three of us, two students, we went to listen to him in December 1965. What he spoke, I don't think we know anything. I remember anything or I understood or not, but it was a spectacle that was there. At that point, little did I know that I will have a lot to do with this man sometime later. And of course, he didn't know anything because I never met him before. So I was a student of his father. And his father was also a Cambridge regular. So at that time, people used to say this, what they happen. Oh, great son of great father. And the Narlikar have a tradition of continuing the thing. Now, he has three brilliant daughters. One of them is a chemical biologist. That's just one of them. And she had been elected to the fellowship of National Academy of Sciences, United States, probably one of the youngest woman fellows. I think she's around 55 or between 55 or 60. And that, so Giant did better than the father, the daughter, and then better than, and so far the academic secrets. So that's the picture you have. Now, when we talk about at the end of the story, you want to take a stock of things, what the man really was. How do I measure it? So there are two things on which we measure them. One is how did he live his life? The other is what did he leave behind? Now, on both these counts, he excels himself on either in on any scale if you want. He lived his life in fullness and very modestly and very simple. Now here modestly, I must say, I was reminded of incident. You all know the incident between Chandrasekhar and Eddington. And when Chandrasekhar won the Nobel Prize, there were lots of interviews. So, in one of the interviews, the interviewer asked him, had Eddington appreciated your this monumental work in early 1930s, what would have happened? What would you think you would do? Chandra said, maybe I might have as well become as arrogant as someone else to tell the Lord whether to play dice or not. But he said, no, I'm happy. I really wanted to do a solid work and fun. So his point was that when you get recognition and applause very young, sometimes you might get questioned. Jain defied that thing that at very young he got those kind of applause and recognition, yet he could keep his head within the limits, and at nowhere you could see he really pushing something or exerting himself which stands him out. So that was most remarkable that he. Of course, I will only make a couple of comments about his scientific work. This new theory of gravity really addressed one of the most fundamental, profound questions in physics, and what is we all call the Mach principle. Now that is the principle which every theoretical physicist is in love with, but nobody really understands. Nobody dares to put it. So the great Einstein was also inspired by, and he thought that his theory of gravity will incorporate or address the Mach principle. But we all know it did not. So this was the question in principle, Fred Hoyle and then Narlikar, which was Narlikar's PhD thesis, tried to address, and they came out with this. And that is why it was great news, death plus everywhere. But unfortunately for this theory, the cosmology it accorded to was the steady state. And 1964 was just about the time, and years earlier, in 1965, there came the observation of the cosmic microwave background radiation, which convinced everybody that the universe is born in a Big Bang and the steady state theory. It's a beautiful idea, it's built based on a very profound principle, but no. So that's one of the founders of the steady state theory. Herman Conley was the first to say it was a very beautiful theory, but what can we do if the observations do not accord to it? Whereas Fred Hoyle was the one who for a year was very depressed, but then he worked out, though a very labored argument, to restrict that what they call the quasi-steady state theory, and propose something that there could be iron seekers with they are going to thermalize the cosmic radiation can give you the same as the media. But that, of course, is a very, very labored argument. And Jain somehow also, so ultimately stuck with the steady state theory. And at one point, now there is none of them are around. It was Burbage, Hoyle, Art, and Narlikar. That were the whole. And I asked him, I did another very longest interview for the book project of golden era of general relativity, where the great players of the 1960s were chosen. So I was asked to interview him. And then in the interview, he tells me that today, if he was a student, he will not do cosmology. I said, why? This is supposed to be the golden era of cosmology with all the observations and very precise things. So cosmology has really become a hard science. He said, no, that may be right, but the cosmology is not driven by a principle. So he said, so that was his ultimate situation here. And he was also unhappy about one thing. There was another very brilliant piece of work Fred Hoyle and Narlikar did, was the relativistic formulation of action at a distance of electrodynamics. And that work, unfortunately, did not receive the attention it should have received. And the reason for this is the extended distance was proposed by Feynman and Wheeler, and initially it was very greatly appreciated. But then, one by one, everybody gave it up. The reason was, though the extended distance is in physical terms, is a much direct approach than the field theory. But the field theory, you leave everything to this and you hardly know how it happens. But the advantage field theory has is that calculations become simple. Extended distance requires it. But they had an audience discussion with Feynman, and he listened to them for an hour and then said, you see, I know, but you can't quantize it. He said, I have been working on it and I gave it up because I can't, it cannot be quantized. Then they took it up and then they thought to him that it could be quantized if you take the back reaction from the rest of the universe. But then he said, no, now I'm a little too old to change my stance. So did the Wheeler and others. And but the only one caveat here is the rest of the universe reaction you take, that demands that the universe is in a steady state. So the real problem is everything sticks again back to the steady state. And of course, then he did the brilliant work, we all know about it. So that is, he returned to India, built a very fine school of relativistic astrophysics and cosmology. And it's an evidence of that is the people of that school now are today everywhere here, all around the world, occupying the leadership positions. And one here is sitting here, with two here. So that and of course, going by the same thing, his younger brother Daud is there. So that's so if that was the case, this was all right. But there's something more important happens is creation of IUCA, Inter-University Centre for Astronomy and Astrophysics. And that I must say was very fortuitous circumstances that gave rise to this such a fortuitous accident that the late 1980s, Jayant was feeling a little uncomfortable at TIFR. On the other hand, the GMRT, which Professor Govind's group was building up, there's a giant meter wave radio telescope, which is the largest telescope in the world in meter wave, which is such a challenging, and this went in 1980s, so that is, we are talking about around 35 years back. And so then one question was that, yes, with such a challenging instrument, who is going to use it? Because the astronomy is not a part of the regular curriculum in the universities, either on physics or much less the mathematics anyway. So something has to be done. And that is what clicked, that we must do something to strengthen astronomy teaching and research in the universities. Of course, the idea could have been, right, why pick up some half a dozen or dozen universities and you start with it. As you probably know here, the universities have their own very rigid thing, and more so there, it was prudent to see that no, this experiment will not succeed. So then the idea was, can we create some central facility which the university people could utilize and things could propagate. So that's how the influence. And this idea, then yes, this is what we want to do. And then with his reputation with the people in large, and we also fortunately had another great friend of all of us, or another TIFR, Professor Yaspal, who was the chairman of the University Grants Commission. And Jayant also had a very strong connection in the government. Everybody was sort of reverential and respectful to him. So when this proposal came, everybody was more than willing to come. So that's how the IUCA started. Now this, as Sunil said earlier, was a new experiment. It's not fully a research institute, but it is a research institute meant for the university faculty. And this interaction was, and of course, one of the models we had before us was the ICTP, International Center for Theoretical Physics in CS, which another former Indians, Abdul Salam, created. And so that's the experiment you have. And in this, of course, since we have started on press, it was Jayan's vision that how the governance should be participatory and involving everybody, or to be very democratic. So I'm very happy to say that apart from what it does to the universities, it is also a very novel experiment in its governance and management. And many of you who have visited this place will probably will know that it's one of the friendliest places because our idea was, because the university people are already very intimidated by research institute. So we have to have an inbuilt in the system that they should feel welcome, not get frightened from this sort of. And I'm very happy to say that now we are over 200 associates from the universities. And in the last 35 years, you see there is hardly any university where there is not the IUCA associate. And it's a very thriving astronomy community which it has been. This was his vision. Well, I just happen to be so what you say, at the right time, the right person wrong. So I'm more as a by accident there, but it has been a. Now let me finally say this, that so what did he leave behind? So that's my this. So generally, one would say somebody goes like, oh, it created a great vacuum, very hard to fill. No, I wouldn't say that. I would say he has left behind so much that there was no space for the vacuum to be created. And it's something we ought to celebrate, that this visionary man left behind so many things. If you have a thriving institute, then by setting his own example in life and work, he has inspired millions of young women and men all over the world, not only in India in particular, but I'm nice to see once George Smoot, another Nobel laureate, happened to visit IUCA. They said, I want to meet Narlikar. And I think Jayant was probably not there that day. He said, I learned cosmology through his book. So this you will find everywhere that then he has written a number of research monographs and textbooks. And above all, he is of course did the science communication and science popularization as a mission. And it is that which has endeared him so much to get at the people at large. Why everybody feels connected with him is and then he has also given rise to science fiction indeed. And he wrote in all three languages, English, Hindi, and Marathi. Marathi happens to be the mother tongue, but Hindi has been his really the language that's where he grew up. And when you know what is the language you are saying, we used to play tennis together. When he missed it, then the slang which will come out will be in Hindi, not in Marathi. So with all this what they left behind, I think there is no reason for us to feel sad, rather to celebrate his life. And that's how he would have liked him to be remembered. And I guess, so ultimately the end is, okay, after 50 years or 100 years, what will, is there somebody will remember you or not? I'm pretty sure his science fiction and the books he has written will certainly be. And more importantly, the Ayuga, fortunately, the buildings don't die so early. We'll keep them alive long, long way to go.
Thank you, Professor Edge. It was wonderful insights. We'll go on to the next speaker, but I must first apologize to Professor Goswami. Younger brother must speak first. Is that right? So, I'll call upon Professor Dawood Kotawala, who is a professor at the Indian Institute for Technology in Madras. And he was a PhD student with substantial period much interaction. So, perhaps you can give us your insights.
Thank you, Sunil, and thank you all of you for joining this session. It's Naresh has already covered almost all aspects of Professor Narlikar. What I'm going to do is add my personal interactions with him, which before I go to the interactions, I must say that almost everyone in Maharashtra has an introduction to Narlikar before, or in fact, without even having a personal meeting with him. And that is because of the science writings which Naresh pointed out. And that was the same case with me. One of the first interactions that I have had with astronomy is through some of the writings in Marathi that managed to get down to the small city from which I come. And mostly the book exhibitions will have some section on science fiction. This is not even science popularization, science fiction in which you will find stories by a personality. There's also a television movie in Marathi, which I saw much before I got into astronomy and astrophysics, and that was written and I think partially directed by Professor Narlikar. It was called as The Comet. That was shown on Doordarshan. That was the national channel for a long time, quite popular channel. I moved to Ayuka in 2005, and one of the first things I did when I joined Ayuka as a graduate student was to set up a meeting with Professor Narlikar because I wanted to do some work on action at distance theory. Like Naresh mentioned the theory already. This was a theory which was initially proposed by Wheeler and Feynman for electrodynamics. Two charges talking not through their electric and magnetic fields, but through a principle that just proposes an action at a distance between the charges without a need to have something like a field, which is sort of a mysterious quantity that we don't have a proper understanding of. So I took an appointment and met him because what I was interested in is before going to Hoyle and Narlikar theory of action at a distance, just understand Wheeler-Feynman theory in a curved space-time. He very patiently listened to the proposal, explained to me the objections and criticisms, partially some of them to do with what Naresh said. What's the quantum version of this theory? Because that was not very clearly understood. And at the end of it, this was a bit of a longish meeting. I was, of course, very very flattered that he could give me that kind of time. I was a beginning graduate student. And after that, he mentioned that, look, I'm traveling to Cambridge for a few months. So as far as the project is concerned, that action of a distance may not work. He suggested that I take up some project with Professor Padmanabhan, popularly known as Paddy. And I did the project, everything went fine. What I didn't expect is that after he got back from his visit, this is what Paddy later told me, that he actually called up Paddy and checked how is he doing, is he still interested in all those things. I was, of course, more than glad to meet him again. We chalked out the problem. But for my PhD, then I joined Paddy. And I forgot action at a distance for quite some time. But of course, the interactions with Professor Narlikar went on because there's something else. Like Naresh said, he had a very broad set of interests. And something else that he has been interested in is, this was when I was at IUCA, was the theory of origin of life on Earth. So he was very closely tied to the notion of panspermia, which was also proposed by Fred Hoyle, that life on Earth began through microorganisms deposited by comets in the outer atmosphere. And JVN had a very specific proposal to Indian Space Research Organization for setting up some balloon experiments where these things could be worked out. The idea he had, and me and a senior graduate student of Penn, Gaurav, what he said is that during the Science Day, which is a very big event in Pune, hosted by IUCA, prepare a poster depicting various aspects, because now that program was complete, the experiment was in place. That was the thing he wanted. He very patiently had regular set of meetings with us, explaining the technical details of the experiments, the technical details of whatever equations go into figuring out why the microorganisms they think could be from outer space. It requires some analysis, because you can't clearly separate out whether these are through the terrestrial flights or any other human missions from outer space. After all that, during the Science Day, the poster is there, people are coming, quite interested, it's fine. It's going like a regular session. And then we ourselves were surprised that Professor Narlikar himself came down. And he just stood next to his poster, wanting to explain to kids what this thing is all about. But this was the time when he got parents more interested in this basic science than the kids, because parents started gathering. And this was the one time during Science Day where more than the students, the parents were interested. And then they were bringing the kids forward that this is Professor Narlikar, just guidance for research and all. He explained a bit, and then my next interaction came, and so I was not quite done with the action at a distance part, somewhere at the back of my mind. So once I left my PhD, I was doing postdoc, a bit more settled in the job. I started working on a very specific formalism for those who have attended the talks I've given here would know something about it. And that had some connection with action at a distance. And I still believe that this theory would make its comeback, because it's formulated in terms of right mathematical structures that, in fact, is demanded by quantum mechanics. Although Feynman's objection was that there's no quantum problem, but I think that's that formalism that takes two objects and just writes down an action describing just these two quantities, not the fields mediating them, is just the right kind of thing which is amenable to quantization, because quantum mechanics has entanglement and other things as basic features that requires these kind of quantities. That's when I wrote back to Narlikar, and I was surprised to get a very quick reply saying that, look, if you take action of the entire universe, again, something Naresh has already pointed out, into the description of an electron, you can get a finite mass for the electron, which is otherwise infinite when you take quantum electron. When you do something called as renormalization in quantum theory, this is a well accepted by now even. Okay, I don't know whether I should say respected, but well accepted principle in quantum field theory. Not really understood. Many people are uncomfortable with it. So what he was saying is that if you take the back reaction of the whole universe into account, you can get finiteness of mass of electron without having to do all this very uncomfortable stuff with renormalization and then regularization. So I think after that we decided that when I visit Ayuka, we would have a session where I wanted to resurrect some of the older ideas. We worked it out very uh, all the mathematical details that went. In fact, the mathematical details are really rigorous in the Hoyle-Narlikar paper. That's what Naresh was saying. It's very unfortunate that they have not been accepted because it's really one of the more rigorous formalisms for describing point particle dynamics. But I'm very sure that some of the future developments in quantum field theory and even quantum gravity would resort back to the kind of action that is prescribed in the Hoyle-Narlikar paper. It involves something called as the Green's function to be a bit more clear. But a quantum version of that is more easily incorporated in the Hoyle-Narlikar version rather than in the conventional description. So I think I would stop there for because others.
Thank you. I would now few months for Professor Swarthi, right? Because Swarthi was a research associate at Ayuka postdoc research associate for a couple of years before he joined the base there. So we have 2 months.
Thank you, Vibha. So, yeah, so the first time I met Professor Narlikar was when I was doing a PhD. And then with my PhD supervisor, I went to Ayuka and got a shock of my life. Because in the eastern part in India, all the research directors, like the directors of the research in institute, they keep some distance from like the utmost. Here it was like got a shock because like the director is just coming and having tea with us and just chatting like normal, and it's like made us feel so homey. So it was like a very pleasant experience. And then I listened to a lot of his talks which he gave, which were always very lucid and like he used to describe everything. So that is where it's like my like and love for him. So it's like a very pleasant experience. So after my PhD, I went to postdoc in a few parts. Then I applied for a postdoc at Yuka, that is when I was in Brazil, and from there I got this 5 years postdoc term, which is like really. So, and my research field has always been the neutron stars, quark stars, the compact objects. Anyway, so when I joined IUCA in October 2003 as a postdoc, JVN just retired, and Professor Naresh took over as a director. So in his earlier days of retirement, JVN still used to come almost every day. It's like regularly, and he had his office, and it's like he was still like bonded in a big way. It's only like later years when he was a little bit like feeble and weak, he used to come much less, but he used to still come. I mean, I went there in 2019 was the last time when I was there for a longer visit, and 2000 last year I was there, but he was not in a state visit there. So till that time, it's like in his last years, he used to come once in a while in 2019 or so. Anyway, so we had a lot of chats at the time of tea, and as I told you that he was excellent teacher. His books are his books about cosmology and GR are amazing. I mean, it's like if you want to teach, then you can start from his book. It's like right from the basics, he tells everything in detail and gives you the idea about how things are built up. And it's like I can still refer the students to read his books about the subjects. Scientifically, I did not have any direct in interaction with him. Well, when he joined I was doing some CMB stuff with Tarun, so which is again like, but we had a lot of chats on the corridor or at the tea time or with some in some of the meeting. So yeah, it's a great loss for the science community throughout the world to miss him. JVN was also quite punctual about his, like he was extremely punctual. Like if he had to go to some place, he will make sure that he arrives there right in time. I think Sunil told us the story that once when he was visiting here, then so on one of the evenings, Sunil invited them to his place, and his neighbors told that some gentleman came a little bit earlier, 5 minutes earlier. So they waited outside so that till it is 6 o'clock, then they will enter because Sunil told 6 o'clock. So he was really a man of principle. So yeah, so I won't stretch my talk much because slightly others talk, and it was a really sad thing to hear that he was not anymore. In his last few years, he was a little bit like quiet. What old age does to everyone. I mean, when we wait list the very lost something like that. Okay, then.
Thank you, Swati, for those recollections. Now we'll grant a few minutes to Professor Rikki. He wasn't really attached to Ayuka, but he were attached to TIFR, and I'm sure there were interactions. So you can tell us about that.
Thank you. So as I was listening to these talks, I was remembering when he last visited here in 2016. I remember Deepak was 2, around 1.5. And he was standing at this very place to give a talk. I think some of you remember. And it turned out his pen drive somehow was corrupted. The computer was not getting his talk. It always happens. Research, especially in tech. So, if you all remember, we had this whiteboard here, the old haggard whiteboard which is now thrown, and a blue pen. And he just stood there and gave a talk on logical fallacies in mathematics and physics. And that was one of the most profound talk on that I heard it. So not only he was like a great science popularizer, he was a great speaker. And this many people said, like how nicely he mingled with students. I remember I first met him in one of the boardrooms in TIFR. I was a newbie then. I think just one paper got published. So, you know, the Greenhorn's PhD guy. And I was just chatting with him on my PhD and said, oh, so what I found out was, just like a Greenhorn newbie, that the naked singularities are quite a generic feature because they're a non-zero measure set. All these big terms immediately thrown at him. He looked at me, smiled in his usual way, He said, how do you define non-information? Sort of, I looked back a little bit, but I was expecting sort of this question. I said, oh, that means open set of initial data. He smiled even more and said, what is your best space? Which space you are taking it as an open set? And then I realized, oops, I should back up. But in his own way, slightly smiling, the way he would make you understand the concepts, that was amazing. I echo with Naresh, I won't say it's a vacuum or a great loss, because just like his steady state theory where new matters are continuously forming, he has left, but he kept a lot of new matters, new ideas for us to venture on. Thank you.
The next person in the roster is Professor Sylvain Hansholt. Sylvain visited IUCAA a number of times and actually helped host Professor Narlikar's trips to South Africa. Over to you.
Thank you very much. Yes, I'm pleased to be able to say a few words in recognition of Prof. Narlikar. Fairly long association, almost not as long as Prof. Maharaj, but from the mid-1990s, when he first started coming here. And I was a young PhD student working part-time, but I was like a chauffeur, driving him around place to place. And then, yes, he was quite gracious enough to visit my home many times. Many conversations with him, and that's the things that I cherish the most about Narlikar. I didn't realize his greatness back then. We didn't know what was happening in the Indian Sea, but we just saw this man as a visiting scientist. And obviously, he was a person who just gave off knowledge and insight that he had gained in talks and meetings. But as a person, it was quite remarkable to actually associate with him. And subsequently, I went to IUCAA a number of times, and one famous trip was Sarah and Dan, Kamil and Sunil and I took a road trip, and the end point was IUCAA. And then we spent quite a nice time there, and many, many other times. In fact, I took my children there many times. The one thing that struck me about the place itself, it just tells you about the kind of leadership this man had. Normally, when you talk about a leader, you think of somebody who's bombastic and arrogant and proud, is always in the media, and his face is always out there giving instruction and so on. But I think this man was a leader who stood back. He had his lieutenants, Dadich and Kembavi and others, but he was a leader actually. He was directing things, and things took shape according to his wisdom. And when you visit IUCAA, you can see vision. You can see this thing wasn't just accidental, just buildings appeared. Anyone can put buildings together. But and in private communication with him also, as I said, okay, most of us enjoy conversations over some alcohol. That was not his strong point. He didn't drink, but still he could actually keep you going with his knowledge and wisdom. And he told me many things about how IUCAA was founded. He was quite close to Rajiv Gandhi, and that's how they got the land and so on. So if you're that well connected with the Prime Minister of India, obviously you are moving in some hectic circles. That's how he got the stuff going, because of his own persona and his linkages. And then, if you look at the things at IUCAA, the way it was designed, he told me these stories about, what was that guy, Charles Correa?
Charles Ray.
The architect.
Yeah.
The architect, and how obviously an architect needs direction from somebody else. And everywhere you look in IUCAA, you see things that are scientific and stimulating. The open spaces, the monuments and the sculptures of Newton and Galileo, Aryabhatta and others, and the rooms itself, everything speaks to insight and vision. I think all of it can be traced back to Narlikar himself, his own world experience at the time and the education that he experienced at Cambridge and other places, but which he brought to bear in the Indian Sea. So, there were many, many conferences held there. I remember at one conference, one of the most humorous relativists, Vishveshwara, was speaking about Narlikar's work, and he was saying, what an amazing thing. And these other guys have spoken about his science fiction and so on. But just a bit more of that. You would have him describing an intergalactic warfare taking place. like a Star Wars kind of event happening in some galaxies out there in space. And then it ends up in a fist fight or some car chase, not car chase, sorry, it was a auto rickshaw chase in Mumbai. The villains will enter that space and that's how the story will end. Who can imagine writing like that? But that was J.R. Narlikar. So I think he'll be sorely missed for his leadership, his vision, and his science communication. Forget about maybe his earlier work, scientific work with other people have spoken about. Maybe those things may not fly as he wanted it to fly, but he was humble enough to admit it. And one of the things in speaking to Naresh and others was that even though he was steadfast on his ideas and steady state theory and so on, he never forced, let's say, his juniors or his underlings to go in his direction. He was open to all kinds of ideas and they could pursue whatever they wanted. That's a marvelous place that IUCAA became. In fact, I began to think this IUCAA would become irrelevant because basically the idea was it was a center for science where they made deals with publishing houses where you could get journals, any journal you want. They had some arrangement, they could get any paper. And often UKZN or University of Natal couldn't afford to subscribe to all the journals. You just send a note to Dadesh, who was the director, he'd send it down to somebody else, and next thing you'd have the paper. So maybe that is no longer relevant because now the whole world of science is opened up on the internet. But the aspect of people communicating in face to face, that you can't replace. You can't do it on Zoom or through written communications. Because at IUCAA, you could be having tea in the morning on the lawn and stumble upon a Nobel laureate or some important person. That actually was a vision of Narlikar. That you don't find anywhere in the world. And it was such a welcoming, people spoke about the welcoming nature. They also had facilities for families. You don't actually get that in the world. Normally you can visit on your own. If you want to go to Isaac Newton Center at Cambridge, only you can go. You can't take your wife and others. It's assumed that you'll come by yourself, but this place was welcoming. In fact, recently I saw some funding available. Now they're actually giving funding for spouses, some amount, like a family care thing, which is visionary because in those days you could see that people can't come and work for 3 months at IUCAA and leave their families at home, and small children and so on. But they have this facility. So he will be sorely missed. And I think the world is slightly poorer now that he's not here. But certainly memories of his greatness and his contribution to science will live on forever. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rasudan. Just a piece of anecdotal information. You are correct when you point out that Professor Narlikar was a teetotaler. In one of his visits to South Africa in the Howard College campus, he was living in the guest cottages there. Then he came along to me and says, "Please, can you get me a bottle of brandy?" And that shook me because I knew him to be a teetotaler. So this brandy was bought, and then he said, "You must take this with us." And what they used the brandy for was to prepare pancakes. He loved making pancakes. Crepes. Yeah, not quite pancakes. You can see how much cooking I do. So that was the exception. A little bit of brandy was used, and I can tell you it was delicious. So that is bringing us towards the end. Is there anyone else that would like to say a few words, share an anecdote, or be compelled to? But if anyone wants to speak, it's an opportunity. So,
This complete teetotaler knew a lot of his South African friends were not complete teetotalers. And he once came to Durban from Paris. And he brought Dan and Sarah a magnificent bottle of rosé champagne.
yes,
Which was absolutely excellent and enjoyed.
Anyone else? Well, then, with that, let's bring the the session to a close, and thank you all for again for having come and contributed to this event, in particular the people who have spoken about the interactions with Professor Narlikar. And I'm sure the interactions at the intellectual level, with these contributions will continue for a long time to come. So with that, let's bring the session to a close. On the outside, we have some snacks, and you have an opportunity then to interact with others, and we can talk about him in a broad setting. So again, thank you.